Your findings show that 40% of the contracts examined, there was little to no proof that that work was actually done. Yet the government department still approve routine payments, or did approve routine payments to GC Strategies. I find that very concerning. I know my constituents found that very concerning during the election, and that was the question. Is this normal?
The Auditor General released a damning report on the ArriveCan scandal, which seemed to assign joint blame to both GC Strategies and government officials. She was called to committee last week to speak on this, and we had the pleasure of watching Ned Kuruc in action, who is our new member of Parliament for Hamilton East, Stoney Creek.
Let's take a look.
The floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Appreciate this, and this is exciting for me because at the doors we heard a lot of what was going on with GC Strategy, so I can finally bring the voice of my riding to this Public Accounts Committee is quite exciting. So I want to touch upon, and thank you for touching upon, value for money. And this is very important to me personally, and Canadians and Conservatives, I think. And I want to touch upon that, how we had some success, that we passed the motion to get back the taxpayers $64 million, and I'd like to thank our member from the bloc for supporting that as well. So my line of questioning will be around value for money. So on page 8 of your report, you mentioned that federal organizations hired by GC Strategies for their specialized expertise were hired for their specialized expertise, but on page 9 you noted that 33% of the contracts reviewed, those same organizations couldn't show that the contractors actually had the necessary experience or qualifications. We all know that GC Strategies is a two-person company that simply outsources the work that they've received. Is this standard practice for government departments not to check the skills and qualifications of people hired through their outsourcing contracts?
I would tell you that the rules require the public service to look at that. It is, and that's why I say the rules are clear, right? You have to put in a contract the skills and competencies that you believe are necessary to deliver the work that you need done. GC Strategies does not do any of the IT work. They do subcontract that out. But the expectation is to then receive the resumes or a description of what previous work that resources have done. And as you pointed out, 33% of the contracts we looked at, that documentation had not been maintained. And so it was difficult for us to be able to conclude that the resource that did the work actually had the skills and competencies that were required, and hence being paid the right rate. The work was done, but we can't tell you whether it was good value for money, and neither could the departments, because they didn't have the evidence to support that the right skills did the work.
All right, folks, it's been a while since we've talked about ArriveCan, but
it has.
Here we go. So for those that may need just a quick recap, so GC Strategies was essentially a two-person recruitment firm. That's what they were. Now, there are many recruitment firms out there, some specializing in IT, because IT recruitment firms are probably one of the most prevalently used out there. Why? Because there's technical skill set that is in demand. Companies don't need it necessarily all the time, so they like to use it on a case-by-case basis. Maybe they only need it for 6 months out of every 5 years. Who knows? But rather than relying on their HR department to just post a contract position out there, what they will do is companies will go to these recruiting firms and say, hey, I need an app developer for 3 months. This is the rate. Go and get them for me. And this is what I need them to do. Then the recruitment firm will go out and get that person and bring them in. Now, if the organization actually cares about the quality of the work, they will typically interview with this person. They will look at the resume. They will ask them for some examples of their prior work to ensure that they're getting the person that they're going to be paying for. But what it seems like the government has done in this case out of CBSA is they didn't bother to vet anybody. All they did is they said, hey, Christian Firth, you and Darren Anthony, go and find us a whole bunch of people to make this happen. And they said, sure, no problem, boss. Then they went out, got a bunch of people, and if it was anything like what they did with Bottler, they may have adjusted their resumes in order to be able to get the maximum dollar per hour reimbursement, and then
it's fit the matrix.
Oh yes, fit the matrix. Yes,
right.
Yes, it's the Matrix's problem, not Neo and Morpheus, but the actual evaluation
the job matrix. What is this matrix that I'm talking about? Basically, it's how much experience you have in certain areas of competency, and that determines how much the government pays for your contract.
Right. So what we've long suspected is that GC Strategies went out and got the most minimum qualified people, and it's no slam on the people themselves, it's on GC Strategies. So they went and got the most minimum qualified people, told them what the rate was going to be for that minimum qualifications. Then they may have adjusted their resume to then get paid the maximum amount for those people, and then they pocketed the difference. That's the theory of what we're saying they may have done. We have no proof of that, but that's the theory.
Well, and that's exactly what they were being accused of last year in committee, was beefing up these resumes
to commit fraud.
To make it seem like the individual whose resume was getting beefed up had more experience than they actually had.
And that's illegal, folks. That's illegal. So this is kind of playing into what's going on with this report, where the people that were managing these resources in the government were receiving these resources, not checking them, not determining if they could actually do the job, and then just handing over our taxpayer money. Nice.
Thank you for clarifying that. Maybe that resorts back to some of the, in my words, you mentioned behavior over the last few years, which I would call maybe bad behavior on this government over the last few years. But another question here. You noted that on page 11 of your report, you highlighted, that the government contractors must prove they did the work before getting paid. Yet your findings show that 40% of the contracts examined, there was little to no proof that that work was actually done. Yet the government department still approve routine payments, or did approve routine payments to GC Strategies. I find that very concerning. I know my constituents found that very concerning during the election, and that was the question. If they're not doing the work, how are they getting paid? Who's looking at this? What's the oversight? Is this normal, and how's this the case?
So, Mr. Kuruc, you've encapsulated the concern of Canadians, not just in Hamilton, East Stony Creek, but I think across this country very well with that question.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did find it very concerning. And we're glad that somebody is in Parliament taking up the torch again to try to get justice for Canadians.
And these are the questions that Canadians across the country have been waiting to be asked, and it's nice to hear them asked.
So I would have told you that it is not normal to sign off and certify that payments should be made when there isn't proof that work was done. And this was one of the concerning behaviors that we saw, because the rules here, again, are very clear, that an individual who is going to certify an authorized payment be made, that they have made sure that the work was done, the deliverables were received, or that the rates charged were accurate rates. And not seeing that made us ask a lot of questions. And many of the public servants told us, well, we know it happened, but we just don't have it here to show you and demonstrate. And that's why the procurement rules exist, is to make sure that you leave that trail to show due diligence and to show value for money. So we're not saying the work was not done. We're just saying that public service could not show us that the work was done.
And the problem with that is, how do we as the taxpayer know that work was done? How do we know that our money was being spent properly? Like, here's the thing. You want to work in the public service, by all means, work in the public service. I worked in the public service.
I was going to say, you have worked in the public service,
But if you are choosing to work in the public service, you are choosing to take on a responsibility. Working in the private sector, it's different. It's private money. It's some rich guys or a bunch of rich guys and gals. It's all their money. This is not the same when you're working in public service. They call it public service because you are literally serving the public. And you are being paid by the public and the taxpayer money. So when you're managing that money, there needs to be a level of care that you would not otherwise exercise maybe in the private sector, or at least you need to have a different mentality. I was always good with my budget in the private sector just because that was just a area of pride for me, because I was managing the company's money well. But I took it even more seriously in the public sector because I knew it wasn't the company's money, it was Canadians' money.
Well, it's the taxpayer dollar, right? It's the dollar of everybody that works in that facility. It's the dollar of your neighbor, your grandparents, your parents, the teacher at school, like everybody. You really don't have a choice whether or not to pay taxes.
Right.
So if, as a taxpayer, you are being forced to pay that money, you want to know that it's being taken care of and it's used properly.
Now, many people in the public service that manage budgets, they do this. They take pride in it and they're respectful of it. So I don't want to be casting aspersions on every single person in the public service. There are many that actually respect this. But when you're looking at these people that were in the CBSA, Cameron McDonald and Tony Utano being two of them, they were approving this stuff. So you need to be able to show that these people actually did the work. And if you can't prove it, and you say, well, you know, it was COVID, it's too busy. I've said this before, I will say it again. These procedures, they are important at the best of times, but they're most important. Procedures and process, this is what you rely on in emergency situations when everything is flying all over the place and you don't know which way is up. This is where you need to rely on your process to carry the day. And if you can't follow your own process, and you can't prove that taxpayer money was spent the way it was supposed to be, and you can't prove the work was done, then you shouldn't be in that job in the first place. Never mind who picked GC strategies. If you can't even manage the file correctly, then you shouldn't be there.
Fair enough. Thank you for your answer. I guess we could chalk that up to bad behavior again. There was another question I had here about, and shortly running out of time. Now, value for money, before signing off on millions of taxpayers' dollars in payments, how is it possible that 31 federal departments got it wrong under the purview of this government?
I believe that points to one of my findings that I had no reason to believe that this is limited to a specific vendor. I don't have a reason to believe it is because it was contracts with GC strategies that we're seeing this behavior, because it is across so many organizations, and it echoes the findings I had in my first report, which looked at contracts with McKinsey and Company. So I do believe it's about going back to the basics, honestly, of knowing what the procurement rules are and really appreciating why they're put in place, right? Most contracts, 94% of the contracts required a timesheet. And not to collect them is a bit of a head scratcher when that's the easiest way to show who did what.
Thank you very much.
When they're talking timesheets here, this is very, very important when you're managing contract staff. A lot of companies use timesheets to manage regular staff, but it's especially important when managing contract staff. Why? Well, when you're looking at an engagement like this, where you are essentially bringing in staff to pay them for a specific amount of time, or it's supposed to be a specific amount of time, to execute work, deliver a project, and then leave. When you're in an engagement like that, you want to make darn sure that the people that you're paying all of this money to are putting in the effort that you're contracting them to do. Because if you have Bob, and Bob says, hey, I've worked on your app for 10 hours last week, you're not just going to say, okay, Bob, here's 10 hours worth of money. You want to say, okay, show me that you did that, Bob. Show me exactly where and when and for how long on each day you actually worked on this app. And then if Bob says, well, I worked on it from 1 to 3 on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's my 10 hours. You worked on it for exactly 2 hours between 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. every single day. Yeah. I don't believe you, Bob. And let's have a conversation about that. So this is what the timesheets allow the contract E to do, where you're contracting these people and it's enabling you to have a discussion with them to be able to ensure that they're actually putting in those hours that you're paying them for. Now, it's not just going to be hours. What they're supposed to show is on Monday from 1 to 3, I worked for 2 hours, and this is what I accomplished. And then that allows you to go and verify that and be like, okay, yep, Bob did actually accomplish what he said that he actually did. From 1 to 3, I can see that in emails, I can see that in the deployment schedule, and I can see that because my QA team is testing the release that Bob actually did. So this is why it's so important. Now, coming back all the way back to the original concern here, she's saying that over 30 departments are not doing this. We spend over $20 billion on consultants, and 90% of those contracts require timesheets, and we're not looking at them. Then you have no frickin' idea how long these people actually worked on your stuff, what they delivered, and you can't even prove they delivered. But when she's talking to these public service people, they're saying, well, just trust me, it was done. I know I can't show it, but just trust me, it was done.
Well, and this creates other problems, because what if the contractor is saying, well, I worked 10 hours that week, and the supervisor is skimming a few hours off the top. They say, well, let's say you work 12, you keep the 10 and I'll keep the 2, right? Who knows what's going on? When you don't have it on paper, when you can't prove it, anything could be happening.
Well, and the problem is that's not a outlandish accusation, because we've seen all kinds of issues within the CRA. We've seen all kinds of issues within the immigration area of the government, where they're padding approvals to get people through the system. The system is being abused by people inside the public service, and it gives all the rest of them a bad name, unfortunately. But the fact that you see this stuff happening is allowing to actually have these hypotheses be a little reasonable.
Right, and this is the whole problem about not having things documented, is you can't prove right or wrong, right? You can't prove if people are being paid correctly, if a little's being skimmed off the top, if people aren't being paid at all. No idea.
Now, you talk to anybody, me included, you talk to anybody that has ever had to either fill out or manage timesheets. Timesheets suck. They suck. People hate filling them out, which is understandable, and people hate managing them, which is understandable. But you're not going to like every aspect of your job, and some things that suck are actually necessary. And in this case, these timesheets, they provide that overview and that documentation of what your contractors are doing and how much time they actually spent on it. And that equation is supposed to equal, this is how much I paid you. And from an auditor general perspective and a value for money and taxpayer perspective, the Canadian taxpayer deserves to know what these people worked on and that we actually got the value that they were billed for. So kudos to Mr. Kuruc on taking this line of questioning, because this is something that every Canadian should be asking of this government in every single project and every dollar that's spent, because they are elected to be the custodians and the caretakers of our taxpayer money, and they need to be able to demonstrate that they're spending it responsibly. Otherwise, they shouldn't have their jobs either.